There's a war coming. A terrible war. There will be chaos. Rivers of blood in the streets. I know it. I can see it coming.
Democracy? Democracy. Democracy is not what these people need. Hell, it's not even what they want. America's been trying to install democracies in nations for a century, and it hasn't worked one time.
Unfortunately, you've grown up hearing voices that incessantly warn of government as nothing more than some separate, sinister entity that's at the root of all our problems. They'll warn that tyranny is always lurking just around the corner. You should reject these voices.
Public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite.
My team and my specialties, information operations and the psychological arm of things, we are trained to deceive if we have to.
If you found out that your public affairs team that was showing you around actually had just completed a 40-hour course in psychological operations and was trained in PSYOPS and in military deception, you start to question, hey, is that an appropriate use of that resource?
You shouldn't trust me. In fact, by my actually participating in that, I will taint the news.
They took the babies out of the incubators. Took the incubators and left the children to die on the cold floor.
And they had kids in incubators, and they were thrown out of the incubators so that Kuwait could be systematically dismantled.
The people we are fighting today, we funded 20 years ago.
It was almost as if it were a planned implosion. It just pancaked.
Well, pancaking almost like a precision implosion.
Everybody get away from the tower. You gotta know the tower that just came down 1013. Where exactly are you, King?
Millions of people are sick and tired of the endless wars, the poverty that is coming, the attacks of our civil liberties.
I don't believe in conspiracy theories. Conspiracies, yes. If I believe it, there's nothing theory about it.
You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Meantime, there are questions multiplying today about the mysterious death of award-winning journalist Michael Hastings.
We are also requesting that your team of advisors include a senior officer who is thoroughly experienced in psychological operations.
Psychological warfare was established as a special staff agency. This move had far-reaching results.
You consider yourself a Marxist?
Well, I would very definitely say that I am a Marxist. That is correct.
This American citizen, Obama, depends on your next decision.
What if the whole purpose of government was to negate freedom? What if freedom was a myth? What if the Constitution meant nothing to the government? What if everything the government has or owns or controls has been stolen?
NATO says its jets intercepted 4 groups of Russian aircraft in a 24-hour period between Tuesday and Wednesday. A spokesperson stressed that NATO airspace had not been violated, but added that such high numbers of sorties in a short space of time were rare.
I'm instructed by Her Majesty's Government of the United Kingdom to warn you that if you do not respond immediately to my orders, you will be shot down.
That reportedly was the voice of the Royal Air Force pilot from one of the fighter jets that went to intercept the plane. When the aircraft was grounded, it turned out to be Latvian.
NATO says it's been tracking an unusual burst of activity by Russian bombers over the Baltic and Black Sea. It said its jets had intercepted 4 groups of Russian aircraft in about 24 hours since Tuesday. However, the organisation admitted the Russian warplanes had not crossed into NATO airspace and that they were exercising their right to fly in international airspace. Meanwhile, the Polish defence minister has said he wants a greater NATO presence in Eastern Europe. He also said that Poland is drawing up a long-term plan to shift some of its military strength towards its eastern border, closer to Ukraine and Russia. in a move which will be seen as provocative by Moscow.
Мы не шли к ним, ребята, мы к вам не шли. Смотрите на нас, посмотрите на нас, на босиков. Мы работали в шахтах, колупались всю жизнь в дерьме за копейки. И вы пришли к нам домой. У меня дома маленькие детки по нашим улицам. Что вы, сука, делаете? Идиоты. И после этого ваши мать с плакат «Пите моему сыну танк». Ну, что я могу сказать? Писюн мы вашему сыну под нос засунем. И вам тоже. Дойдем, сука, до Киева. Нас не будет. Придут следующие, ребята. Ну, все равно мы Донецк не оставим, ребята. Вы даже и не надейтесь. Мы вас, сука, будем рвать, что хотят.
Discuss the likely outcome of the elections. We can now cross live to Marcos Papadopoulos, publisher of and editor of Politics First magazine, joins us. Thank you, Marcus. Now, as we've heard, millions of people have boycotted this vote. Given that, just how legitimate can they be considered?
Ukraine's elections were a total and utter farce and an insult to so much of the Ukrainian population. Ever since the Western-backed coup this February in Ukraine, the pro-Western government of President Poroshenko has rolled back democracy in the country. The two traditionally dominant political forces in southeastern Ukraine, the Party of Regions and the Communist Party of Ukraine, have effectively been destroyed as political forces in the country. They have been singled out as traitors, they have been referred to as agents of Moscow, they have been expelled from the Ukrainian parliament, they've been subjected to violence and intimidation, and so it's little surprise that millions of Ukrainians in South Ukraine, Eastern Ukraine, chose not to vote. They chose not to vote because their traditional parties were not on the ballot paper, and they're also very fearful. If we take the Communist Party of Ukraine, its leader Petro Simonenko, at the beginning of this year, his home was set on fire by ultra-nationalist mobs. Now, you won't hear about that in Western media. Certainly the BBC never referred to that because it doesn't fit in to the West's narrative of what's happening in Ukraine. So only on paper does Ukraine have democracy. In reality, it is very selective, and it is only for those parties in the country which are pro-Western.
Good old Cold War rhetoric. You probably haven't missed it much because it seems to never have gone out of style.
Unfortunately, we're really in a Cold War mentality, and there are even suggestions that there's an axis of evil, which consists of Russia, Iran, and North Korea, which is ludicrous. But that's the extreme that some in the Western media can go to.
From NATO's new Secretary General claiming that there's nothing but darkness and cold behind Russia's border, to the US President citing terror group ISIS, Ebola, and Russia as the main threats to the world, to the government of Sweden chasing an alleged intruder, a Russian submarine.
Who hasn't spent 20 minutes in IKEA and immediately wanted to launch an attack on Sweden? Someone has to pay for what I'm going through here.
An image of a tiny dot in a sea that surfaced to become absolutely nothing, forcing Sweden to end its hunt after a week of sleepless nights.
No, Sweden. That's not how it works. If you see a fuzzy photo of something, you let it consume you for the rest of your life.
But of course, it's not just political incidents playing up to the anti-Russia mentality. The news media are always ready to join in too. Take CNN's senior international correspondent, for example, making a mountain out of a molehill.
These provocative T-shirts are just one light-hearted sign of what many in the West regard as a much darker trend in Russia.
Or newspapers putting together articles such as this one, 7 reasons why Russia is spying on its neighbors, based on cases that are yet to be built into factual ones. Allegations spun until there's no end in sight, while never checking double standards at home.
Как распорядилась история, мы сейчас стоим на позициях, на которых в 1943 году стояла советская армия. На тех же самых позициях. И воюем, кстати, против той же самой фашистской чумы. Если мне кто-то скажет нет, я вам скажу да. Я сегодня встречался с представителем штаба, да, он с Дебальцева приехал. У него на шильке, на руке СС Галичина. Если мне кто-то скажет, что это не фашизм, тогда я не знаю. Если вот эти факельные шествия, что прошли, это не фашизм, тогда я не знаю, что это. Вы и есть фашисты. Из вас сделают рабов фашизма. Одна нация, одна краина, а остальные нации не имеют права жить в вашей стране. Очень интересно, почему это не видят все остальные. Вот мне просто интересно, строится целое фашистское государство в центре Европы, этого никто не видит.
Suspicious cyber activity detected on the White House computer network. But it appears the White House may not have been the ones to actually detect the breach. According to the Washington Post, it was a tip from an ally that alerted the administration its computer systems had been compromised.
I'm not in a position to talk in any detail about how the nature of this threat was detected.
To assess the threat, cybersecurity teams initiated temporary outages on its computer network to defend the system. As for who is behind the breach, the White House isn't saying.
Our efforts are ongoing, and by publicly revealing what we know, it might affect our ability to learn more.
But U.S. officials with first-hand knowledge tell CNN while they're still investigating the origin of the attack, Russian hackers are considered to be the prime suspects, as they usually are in cases of cyber attacks on the U.S. government and U.S. companies.
We've seen just in the last few months an increase in attacks that seem to be originating from Russia, and I think that is the particular concern today in Washington about the attack on the White House.
Now right to the White House and new details about those computers in the West Wing hacked. What was on them and who do they think was behind the cyber attack?
Sources say the primary suspects are Russian hackers tied to that nation's government. One theory that they're retaliating due to U.S. support for economic sanctions because of Russia's suspected role in the Ukrainian conflict. Also, Russian hackers are suspected of targeting NATO, the World Bank, and U.S. defense companies. Sources say the new breach fits that
now,
pattern.
According to a scathing report from the New York Times, you can add one more item to the growing list of scandals surrounding the U.S. government and their special operatives in the FBI and CIA. Now that we have the Freedom of Information Act, those secrets are harder to cover up for very long. And it's an old secret that's making headlines today. A new leaked document shows us how U.S. spy agencies actively recruited, employed, and trained Nazis as informants and spies in the Cold War. Declassified records show proof that J. Edgar Hoover and Alan Dulles paired up to aggressively enlist the help of these former Nazis. Some of them convicted of war crimes and used them as assets against the Soviet Union. One Nazi officer was convicted of killing 60,000 Jews. Another was a mentor and top aide to Adolf Eichmann, and even wrote policy papers on how to terrorize Jews. And yet both men would later work for the CIA and safely move back out of the U.S. To make matters worse, when prosecutors started digging up dirt on this story back in the early 90s, government officials say CIA lawyers pressured them to give up their search. Of course, this bleak story connecting the U.S. government to some of the most murderous Nazi officials in history can only serve to put yet another nail in the coffin of U.S. and Israeli relations. Not just that, but it's one more reminder of exactly how far the FBI and CIA are willing to go if they aren't held accountable for their actions.
How many more of us have to die